contemporary civilization, and of the backwardness, as it were, of our Persia in comparison. I then, of course, under the influence of alcohol, which I was then already consuming in rather large quantities, fell for the first time. That is to say, I, as a prospective father of a family, behaved vilely. Although this cost me at the time much suffering and remorse of conscience, yet the environment, together again with the action of this alcohol, caused me to fall a second time. And thereafter everything headed, so to say, down an inclined plane and led me to the point where I am now, indeed, in this respect, a most filthy animal. Especially now, at times, whenever I happen to be completely free from the influence of alcohol, I suffer moral anguish and loathe myself with the whole of my being. And at such moments, I hasten all the more to pour this alcohol into myself again in order to forget myself and thus drown my sufferings. Having lived this ugly life in the countries of Europe I enumerated, I finally settled down here in Paris, in precisely that European city to which women come from every part of Europe and from other continents with the obvious intention of putting horns on their other legal halves. And here in Paris, I have now become entirely addicted to both these human vices, that is, to alcohol, and as you have said, to petticoat chasing. And I run left and right without any sane reasoning at all. And now the satisfaction of both these vices is more necessary to me than the satisfaction of my hunger. That is how it has gone with me up to the present moment. And what will come next, I do not know, and I do not care to know. I always even try my best and struggle with myself not to think about it. As he said these last words, he sincerely sighed and dejectedly dropped his head. I then asked him, "But tell me, please, are you really not afraid of being infected with those terrible diseases which these women usually suffer from, whom a petticoat chaser like you run after?" At this question of mine, he again sighed deeply, and after a short pause told me as follows: my esteemed and worthy doctor, in recent years I have thought about this question a great deal. It has even become for me a subject of such interest that in a certain sense it has been a blessed means whereby my inner odious life has, in spite of everything, flowed more or less endurably. As a physician, you will, I think, probably be greatly interested to know how and why this same question interested me so much several years ago, and to what conclusions I arrived after I had, in a relatively normal state, very seriously observed and studied it. About 5 years ago, I had such a fit of depression that even alcohol scarcely had any effect on me, nor pacified my psychic state. And it so happened, just then, that I often met with certain acquaintances and friends who talked a great deal about filthy diseases and how easily one could be infected with them. From these conversations, I myself began thinking rather often about myself, and little by little I began fretting about my health almost like a hysterical woman. I used often to reflect that being almost always drunk and constantly having affairs with such infected women, then evidently, even if for some reason or other I had so far no obvious symptom of the diseases, I must nevertheless, in all probability, be already infected with one of them. After such reflections, I first began consulting various specialists in order to find out what were the early symptoms of whatever diseases I already may have had. Although none of the local specialists found anything at all in me, I nevertheless continued to doubt because, on the one hand, my fretting about my health, and on the other hand, my own common sense, continued to assure me that I must certainly already have been infected with one of these terrible diseases. All this brought me to the point that I decided at any expense to have a consultation here in Paris, but this time with the leading specialist from the whole of Europe. I could afford myself this because, owing to the World War, when transport had everywhere broken down and all commodities had gone up in price, our firm, having everywhere very large stocks of dried fruit in storage, had that year made considerable profits, a fairly good portion of which fell to my share. When I had called these European celebrities together, they unanimously pronounced, after all kinds of very detailed investigations and what are called chemical analyses, known to them themselves, that there was not the slightest sign of any venereal disease in my organism. Although this finding of theirs put an end to the chronic fretting about my health, yet it was the cause of the growth in me of such a strong feeling of inquisitiveness and curiosity to clear up this question, that from then on it became a sort of mania with me, a kind of idée fixée. And also from then on, the serious observation and study of everything concerning these diseases animated and justified the sense of what I've called my odious life. During this period of my life, I made these observations and studies of mine at all times, with my whole inner real I, while in a drunken, semi-drunken, and also sober state. And then, among other things, I also read assiduously every kind of literature existing here in Europe concerning these diseases, and also most of the books on this question in French and German. This I could easily do because, as you see, I have such a command of French that you can scarcely guess that I am not a real French intellectual. And with the German language also I get along very well, because I lived a fairly long time in Germany and always, in my free time, studied their language and their literature for want of something to do. So, when I became interested in this question, I was able to become fully acquainted with all the knowledge that exists in contemporary civilization on the subject of venereal diseases. In this literature, there appeared to be hundreds of theories and hundreds of hypotheses concerning the causes of venereal infection, but I could not discover one convincingly categorical explanation how and why some people are infected with these diseases and others not. And I soon became convinced that I could not clear up this for myself with the knowledge existing on this question at the present time here in Europe. From all this literature, putting aside, of course, and not even mentioning the multitude of those thick scientific books here, whose contents immediately show every more or less normal person that they were written by people who were, as is said, complete ignoramuses on these questions. That is to say, not specialists in human diseases at all. I got the general impression that people were infected and fall ill with venereal diseases only owing to their own uncleanliness. When I made this categorical deduction, there was